So we're going to move on to our first plenary session of the day called Engaging and Empowering People Using Data and Digital Innovations. In it, we're going to be addressing how can we use data to better understand engagement whilst also avoiding those minefields of privacy and security-related issues. So I'm going to hand over now to our chair. Piva is Vice President at TM Forum and is Managing Director for its Smart City Forum. As a non-profit member, TM Forum represents over 850 companies where they drive collaboration and collective problem solving. So please welcome to the stage, Piva.
Good morning, everybody. And good morning, Jill.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. So,
Hi.
we have a fantastic panel here today,
How
so
are you?
everybody take a seat. I will shortly introduce them. And we are going to have a very exciting debate about an area that I find to be perhaps the most interesting aspect of digital transformation, which is actually tying it to something meaningful. So when it comes to, if we look around the world today and we think about what's going on, one of my questions is always, is data helping us make better decisions or not? Think about it. Take a look at political processes across the world. Are we making better decisions now that we have more data at our disposal compared to when, maybe 10 years ago, when we didn't have all this data around us? We could argue that on national levels, that might not always be the case. But when it comes down to cities, I think we have a better structure, a better way of dealing with how to collect data and how to use data. And I think as the further we go down this path of digital transformation, I think cities need to lead the way on how we embrace the power of data, but also watch out for the problems that it could also give us at the other end. This is part of the reason why the TM Forum launched the City as a Platform manifesto some 8 weeks ago, now supported by cities like Barcelona, Dubai, and a lot of others. Do take a look at that if you're interested, because it all comes down to, do we have the right data, and then how do we use this data? And that's exactly what we're going to debate here at this session today. So if I could ask you to maybe pick that seat over there, it would be fabulous. And then I'll just quickly introduce our panel, and then we'll jump right into the questions that we have. So coming directly, actually from a visit with His Holiness the Pope, we have Adriana, the mayor of Prague. It's going to be delightful to learn about what Prague is doing in this area.
Hi.
So you sort of represent the political side in our panel today. We have Claudio, the global CTO of Hexagon. You have a team of 1,500 people and a couple of dozen CTOs that work for you. So you probably take a look at digitization from a slightly different perspective. How can technology enable it? And we're going to discuss that as well. We have Danielle, the CIO and Commissioner from the city of Chicago. And Danielle is running a number of interesting projects bringing citizens closer to the city and to decision-making in general. So that's the CIO's perspective. And then from Kiev, we have Vasyl, and I won't even try to pronounce your surname, so we call you Vasyl from now on. Mm-hmm. And you're going to tell us about what is happening and what is going on in bringing democracy closer to us, normal people living in cities in Kiev. And finally, we have Gilles. I think you all had the pleasure of listening to Gilles. You look like the Apple guy among us, so you have to be the provocateur at the end over there. Okay. So wonderful. So with that very, very brief introduction, I also want to remind you that you have a chance to be part of this panel. You need to take your Smart City Expo app up and find the area where you can pose questions to this group. The really good questions will be voted up in the list, so we can actually ask the really relevant questions to the audience. So having that said, I'm going to kick this off by actually asking you a question, Adriana. In the city of Prague, from sort of your mayor's perspective, I know you have been pulling together data in a central way, and you have also gathered a really strong team of data analysts in order to interpret and understand this data and make use of it. Can you tell us a bit about how you're doing things and why you're doing them and the outcomes you have seen from this?
Well, good morning. I first consider myself as a manager of the city, not a politician, because the difference is that the politicians are talking too much and we are doing it. That's why maybe the panel is focused more in the cities. You see?
It works.
Cities are the places where the legislations, for example, what the politicians are creating, consumed. And usually, if we are coming to talk about technologies, usually the legislation is somewhere behind. This we are facing in Prague or in Czech Republic. So, but answering your question, yes, I mean it's costly if you don't have data and you don't make decision according to the outcomes of the data. That's why when we came into office 2014, we started to think about how to do it better. And with a team of my colleagues who are sitting here somewhere in the audience, we created this idea to, first of all, make a strong data platform. And I must thank Chicago, our sister city, that they were extremely helpful to send us over the experts this year, visited Chicago, and together with them, we started and actually doing data analysis to further provide input into the further decision making for the city council, because so far things have been decided without data, and according, I guess, Cisco, they counted the losses together. By 2022, we have, for example, we can spare money in a range of millions if we are going to make our decision according to data. So that's why it's ample and really important for cities to really have a very strong analytical team to just give us the input. And as I said, we have to work on the legislation because this is quite a problem. Just imagine, Prague is 1.3 million inhabitants, and Prague is divided into 57 boroughs. 57 boroughs with 57 small mayors, 57 budgets, 57, it's incredible, I know, you are shaking your heads, it's incredible. And then we have still some companies who are running the business and which are owned by the city. So the data are somehow spread around, and we had to simply put it on one place to get a big picture. And this is our aim, what we are going to do.
Thank you very much, Adriana. So in many ways, Prague is actually bigger than London, is what you're saying.
Well, if we have just count together all the commuting people from the central Bohemian region, and Prague is in the middle of the central Bohemian region, we are 2.3 every day, on daily basis, people in Prague, and while together with the central Bohemian regions, we are approximately 3 million people.
Lovely, and you touched on that topic of actually getting data together. So if I were to turn to Claudio, we have millions of data points coming from cities every single day in all of our cities nowadays. How can we somehow prioritize this data?
Oh, perfect, Carl, thank you. Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. So if you consider the, being straight to your question, for sure, one of the smart cities' key components is crowdsourcing, where the objective inputs from citizens will tune cities' process in a dynamic way to best fit the needs of the city, let's say, to adapt to the needs of the communities. More engagement and consequent empowerment of the citizens will even permit to cross the bridge, to close the gap between how citizens and decision makers understand, perceive the city. And this will permit a more democratic management and running of the cities, for sure. Another consideration would be how crowdsourcing would lubricate the shared economy, for example, something that we hear a lot now. And this will probably change totally the behavior of the city's actors. Wrapping up these considerations, for sure, crowdsourcing is important and is a priority. What I would like to bring to perspective as a second thought is that we have to consider emphatically the digital transformation of the city. That means the digitization of data and digitalization of assets and processes in the city, and the optimized interoperability, and this is my key point, how you optimize the interoperability of different disparate processes. And I consider this really a low-hanging fruit. Today, we have in the cities a lot of standalone processes that impact directly the quality of life. And they are not communicated, they are not interlinked. We do know that cities are a living, breathing, dynamic, complex organism, if you will. And modern cities have incorporated important process flows and complex process flows that they affect and interact, or they affect and interfere each other, but they are not at all synchronized. That means they are not optimized. So it's a low-hanging fruit. Why? Because if we can link this process with a solid digital platform through digitalization, we could optimize, I will not say easily, but they are there, they are operating, they are already functioning. Some of the, for example, dispatching systems, teams, service teams in the field, they are not communicating. You have an event in a city, you don't consider whether movimentation or move of people with dispatching, ambulance, police, firefighters to optimize all together. So with a digital platform that, with an immersive and contextual digital platform, we could easily get benefits on this standalone process, improving the quality of life.
So, Claudio, your point is focused around the fact that we have digital ecosystems that collide in cities, and maybe cities is the ultimate melting pot for digital ecosystems, and the interconnection between those ecosystems is really the crucial part.
Interoperability.
Yes. So going to you, Danielle, now we move again to Chicago, so this could get wild and crazy. What do you do in order to make the distance between the citizen and the city closer?
So as the mayor mentioned, we've long been leveraging data and bringing data together in order to drive decision making in Chicago. Launched open data. We collaborate with residents, with businesses to build solutions using that information. But one of the really exciting things that I think we're doing now is thinking about how can we collect new information about our neighborhoods, using IoT and connected devices. How do we get a better sense of what's happening? So we're deploying a project called the Array of Things, which is a network of sensor nodes across Chicago that'll measure different livability factors, so climate, environmental activities like the traffic of pedestrians, bicycles. Can you identify standing water and other things in the environment? So we'll have a better set of data that will also be open, like much of the other data that we have, that will serve as a platform for communities who care about things like air quality to understand what's happening, for the government to identify that it is an issue, think about interventions that we can take and measure our success there, and then for researchers and even private companies and others to help us build solutions to tackle those problems. So we're really excited about the opportunity that that project is going to bring.
And you also seem, Danielle, to have a little bit of a startup mentality when it comes to these projects. Can you just articulate that slightly as well?
Sure. So we're also launching the development of a new non-emergency services management system, so something we call 311 in the US, which if you want a city service, you call that number. You can also interact in a variety of other ways, but in modernizing that system, we plan to co-develop it with our residents. So we are going to get their feedback, show them prototypes, get input on those prototypes, and iterate over time. So we hope that in so doing, they will be able to leverage some of the new features of that system, whereby they can opt in and they can see sort of an audit trail of what's happened related to the services they've requested, or we might be able to proactively push information to them about things that they care about or their neighborhood. So we're really looking forward to that co-development process with our residents for that new central system, which is the way that our residents interact with us on a regular basis.
On a complete side note, but I find it interesting that cities are now talking the same language as startups are doing, in the sense in how things are being actually innovated and then eventually rolled out. So moving to Vasyl, representing Kiev, you have quite a lot of experience in actually getting hands-on input from your citizens that live in Kiev. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I want to share experience from Kiev. It's capital of Ukraine. It's over 3 million city. And in Kiev, there is a Kiev city card system allowing citizens have ID cards that works for access to all city services. And very nice example from the past is how city moves forward the democracy with that system. So there is a municipal petitions. Actually, that's a process where any citizen can post a petition, and if that petition gets over 1,000 votes from the citizens, then municipality had to obligatory move that petition into consideration and start the formal review of the petition, and after that make an action in order to deploy the petition. So with Kiev Card, there is an online service allowing citizens having the card go online and post or vote for that petition. So many petitions in Kiev have passed through that process, and really many of them are changing the city very rapidly. And this is just one example, but more to this, the same city-wide spread identification program allowing build even more innovative, interactive, and engaging services, like citizens can post issue report saying that something bad happened in the city or need a repair. And because of that fully identified system, municipality is reacting rapidly. Everything is happening online and easy accessible to citizens.
Thank you very much. And now moving to Gilles. We didn't have the pleasure of hearing your entire presentation earlier, so apologize for that. But if I were to ask you a simple question, is this data that we are gathering, is it really helping us make better political decisions? And feel free to elaborate.
I really liked your point. I think it's a very, very smart one. It's obviously what I would say is I think that we're probably in in a phase where people who understand the data can benefit from it at the expense of the one who can't. So it's therefore you see it every day. You see it during election. You see it a lot in marketing processes. And we probably need to have not only corporations and, I would say, rogue state or different people who try to influence election to be savvy, data savvy, but to have citizens, everyone basically, and it would probably balance the poor on the long run. So that's one thing, and the other thing is, all the time I think we don't need to look at the finger. We need to look at the sun. And sometimes you try to look at the data, and the data is not necessarily good. And you don't think about the final results you want to get. I don't care about technology, I care about the results. So if I can use technology to enhance my system, I would do it. But I think a lot of people are so much fascinated by the notion of data, of smart cities and so on, that they forget the ultimate result. And I think it's the reason why we need to make sure that anything we would design, we would bring in the final users, to make sure that we don't just do it for ourselves.
Thank you, Gilles. So I'm going to, we're now going to start the debate here in earnest. And like any panel, the more controversy we can generate between ourselves, the more fun it will be for everybody in the room. So let's see if we can manage that. So my first question will be actually a little bit open, but possibly to you, Adriana. Are there issues or questions that lend themselves nicely to actually asking citizens for their opinions? Or are there questions that might just be a little bit too difficult or complex to involve citizens in? Because we can all imagine a scenario where we are being asked for everything all the time, and that wouldn't necessarily be democracy, in my opinion. It will be actually somebody taking us, who we elect, who actually wouldn't be taking their responsibility to do it on our behalf. So the question is, what type of issues should we try to involve our citizens in? Is there an answer to that, Adriana?
Well, you answered it partially already. If it comes to, let's say, improve the environment where the citizens are living, for example, if they want more benches or more green areas or, I don't know, better waste management, okay, we can ask them. But once it comes to strategic questions, I don't think that will be a good idea to gather all the ideas together and decide upon the opinion of the citizen, because they don't have that input. And I took the responsibility because, I was elected, and I take the responsibility, I bear the responsibility. It's heavy, but it's my job. That's it.
Which I totally understand. But then we have other places in the world, say Kiev, where you have, where there's a law, I understand. If you have more than 10,000 people signing a petition, you actually need to bring it up in the council and take an action on the back of that. Can you explain if this is a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, this is definitely a good thing for something easy to implement that has big impact to citizens. Like, there are tons of these petitions, and some of them are about, okay, let's extend our subway network in the city, or let's have more parks, or let's repair the school in that area. But all of these petitions are very short steps in terms of strategic development. So there are no petitions saying let's build a super strong strategy and develop city for 10 or 20 years ahead. How it's going to be in the long scale. So this tool is very nice for start getting first feedback and let people learn from their experience. So with every sprint or milestone, more and more people are starting to getting engaged in that. And probably this is the first thing to build smart citizens in order to build smart city.
So sort of moving into the role of digital for democratic processes. what would be the top 3 sort of use cases, in your opinion, from this panel? In, if we want to do digital transformation in our cities, what would be the 3 biggest either reasons for it or use cases to drive? Should we start with you, Danielle, to see what your approach in Chicago?
Sure, I think, so our goal really is to become more responsive, right? So I think using the way that we identify issues in the city today, it's based on our residents. So they tell us when there's something wrong. And then we, in turn, have to sometimes go and inspect. Is that really the case?
So your first point is citizen engagement?
Yep, citizen engagement, absolutely, is critical, but also the optimization of our own processes as a follow-up to that. So how do we do a better job of delivering those services?
Effective city operation would be the second bullet.
Yep, absolutely. And then, really, as governments, we have to serve everyone. So I think thinking about inclusion and accessibility is critical.
So sort of the digital divide and inclusivity would be the third bullet. Is this shared with in Prague?
Well, yes, as I said, the city is divided in 57 boroughs, so everybody is in. Everybody is working already, so, and everybody is every day complaining something is wrong. I mean, we don't have a petition, but everybody can come to my office and they sign for a meeting with me, for example. I'm pretty open for everybody. And we, at the operator who is operating data platform, we have a website and everybody can just write a note if they have an idea. So we just listen to it. Recently we launched a collaboration with these 57 boroughs. So if they have a very specific project, so we can look on it, and if it's okay, and if it's helpful for the entire picture, big picture, so we are going to help to implement them. So it is, the involvement of the boroughs and the citizens is important, but more important is the collaboration, for example, with the businesses and the universities, what we have in Prague. And this we are doing it in our platform in the city. We signed memorandums with more than 5 universities, the Charles University, Technical University, Chemistry University, all universities, so they are on board in the team, and we are working together also with cities, for example, with Chicago, when we can adapt all the good grapes you already have, and to make it possible and to make benefits for the city.
Claudio, does this resonate with you as well? Is this what you see when you?
Yeah, when I made my point, I referred to optimization of processes. When you are addressing a real-time process, dispatching ambulance, dispatching police, security, you cannot introduce subjectivity. It's impossible. You have to populate the algorithms that distributed ambulance in case of an event with facts, with objectivity, with objective information. So there are 2 pretty different flavors in this, right? For sure, crowdsourcing with subjective, with opinions, it's important too. And then if you have a fantastic deep learning neural evolutionary computing algorithm that filter everything and get to the reason, that this is not the case today, right? So I guess there are 2 elements to this. One is real-time workflows, process flows in a city that works dynamically with algorithms, precise algorithms that can get information. But this information has to be objective. Position, a photograph with an interpretation of something that is real. We know that there is a very interesting report in HBR, this issue now, that shows exactly the biases of social crowdsourcing. So people talk to the other to flavor it. We have to be very careful with the biases of we human beings, right? So,
and it's a huge bias.
No. So this is my point.
So I'm bringing in a question from the audience, just to make sure that you don't forget that you can both ask questions and vote for questions to be asked. So it's more of a so we don't forget about that. This is really a question from Anna, who lives in a city with extreme high levels of corruption in the council. How will digital actually help reduce problems like this? Because they all exist in different parts of the world. I can provide my own perspective later on, but let's start with maybe Gilles, would like to jump in?
Yeah, I think it's obviously we all think about transparency, about budget transparency, about the public market being more well handled. But I think coming back to my previous point, we saw a lot of wave of open data, for instance, in Africa and many countries where there is a lot of corruption. And I'm not sure that we can really claim that it has completely changed the scene. So again, what you need to have is both the technical platform to provide the data to citizens, and as well to make that the users, the citizens are savvy, you have a tech scene that is able, I would say, a data journalist scene and so on, that is able to handle with this data. So it's also the role of mayors and cities to make this ecosystem to thrive. And
could we get some concrete examples on how digital could actually alleviate things like corruption, make this a more rare occurrence? Anybody who wants to jump in?
To me, I mean, I'm really interested in what happens in Africa in general, and I think Rwanda is a really good example. The corruption was probably one of the highest in Africa, and it went very close to one of the less corrupted countries in Africa. And it relates a lot to the way they are digitalizing all the processes in the government. So it's much more difficult to hide some money if the budget is completely fully open to anyone. So that's one thing.
So basically being part of having a neutral digital process, removing the opportunity for corruption in the chain is really part of the solution there.
But if you want this to succeed, you need to really change the governance. If you have a very siloed, very vertical, very opaque governance, it won't work. So you need both to have the platform and to have a new type of governance and to bring in the citizens, to make sure that you don't face citizens, but you put the citizens at the core of your platform and at the core of your government engine, so to say. I think it's completely inefficient to think only in terms of I want to bring in the technology and I will keep the system as it was before.
So I want to drag the panel into a darker corner now. Let's see how that goes. This is some of the positive effects of digitization that we can all agree on. We digitize processes, we take out corruption, we make things more effective, more equitable for everybody concerned. But what if this goes a bit too far? What if everything we do gets monitored, recorded, managed? What if our future job applications are scrutinized through the lens of the personal data that we left behind? Where should we, when the pendulum swings from having no data to having all data, where should we try to stop this pendulum swing? Adriana, would you offer your sort of perspective on this?
Well, I was afraid you were asking me about corruption because my background, but thanks God it was put to somebody else, this question. Well, it's an extremely difficult question for people who have to manage something. I mean, I'm grateful for the data I get because it makes me a little bit more secure in my decision making. Yeah? But of course, in systems like cities, it's ample to have people who are educated and who really know what they are doing, who are managers, at the positions which are really important. For example, city councillors or heads of companies which are owned by the cities. And this is really ample. I mean, I wouldn't be that much afraid that the machines will take over our lives until we don't allow it. And this is about integrity, about education, about dedication to the job we are doing. And then I'm not afraid that this will happen.
Because I'm seeing in many cities around the world, possibly a little bit more in Asia, that data is being recorded on an unprecedented level. And as long as you use it for good, it's not a problem. But
okay, but then you have the security issue. I mean, as a mayor, you have two possibilities. Either you are collecting the data and somehow recording it, and then you have the security issue, especially nowadays. That's really a tricky decision. I mean, you have to provide security for your citizens. This is absolutely the priority. At the same time, how we are going to do it without sometimes recording it. Yeah.
So let me ask Danielle, are we doing that? Are we actually safeguarding the citizen rights here in this process of trying to be more open, more inclusive? But is that actually what is going on?
So I think that as governments, we need to think about when we're designing a system, what data do we really need, right? Do you really need personal identifiable information, or those things that are individually tied to someone? And in many cases, you don't, right? And maybe in the past, when security was less of an issue, when things were less connected and integrated, it was common practice to collect that information. But I think it's, given the security landscape, it's making us take a step back and reevaluate how we design those new systems. But also important is, and so that's how we approach the rollout of the array of things, for example. So we consulted with privacy experts, the EFF, the ACLU, to get their input, cyber experts. We know that putting these devices in people's neighborhoods, they're curious, what are you doing? Are you monitoring us? But really the project is about monitoring the health of the neighborhood and the built environment, not the individuals. So we're able to draft a set of privacy and governance policies with input from those experts. And then we asked the public for their input on those policies. So we made that open through a platform called mymadison.io that lets you mark up legislation or policy in an interactive way. We also held community meetings to get input on that policy. So, that's one way where we've approached sort of the deployment of some of these new technologies is to really engage the residents in the conversation around privacy and what we're doing with these new technologies.
So it seems clear to me that we now have the tools to be able to make this work. We have some of the example use cases, like voting for green space or making decisions that we can all understand. What would be if we try to look into the prism, look forward a couple of years, what will this evolve into? Does anybody have a vision on how involved we can get our citizens and how engaged we can get them? Because on one hand, we would like people to be extremely involved in what we are doing, but on the other, we don't want them to constantly be in the way of our decision making either. So looking ahead a few years, anybody wants to offer an opinion on where we might be in, say, 3-5 years' time?
Well, in 1969, we sent the first man to the moon, and we thought that in a couple of years we will send them to Mars. We didn't. So I don't know.
I'm happy nobody's been sent to Mars. It seems to be a one-way ticket.
I don't know. Let's see. I'm pretty confident that that will be not bad. It will be okay.
Any other thoughts from over there? Vasyl, how do you see this playing out in Kiev or in the rest of the world?
Well, I imagine this as a big, trusted, very efficient, engaging platform where anything that happens there gets a fair response and a very clear status, what is going to be.
Oh, I thought that platform was called Facebook or something like that.
Well,
Twitter. Instagram.
I mean, the things that happens inside the city, and if you are asking questions, the Twitter and Facebook, like social media, are basically about creating content and discussion. but it's not going. It's not focused on the actions taken after the consideration. The line here has to be how much engagement we really want to do, and this is really open to me. I don't know the answer here.
So I have a hypothesis here, which I want to try on all of you. Could it be that there is a counterweight to things like Twitter and Facebook that seems to be driving opinionated thoughts, not always correct ones? Could we provide something on a city level that actually is more fact-based and data-driven, as opposed to more opinionated and maybe populistic?
You can, but the question is whether or not someone will actually believe it, right? So the validation, the trust, you have to build trust with government so that your residents then believe that information, right? So how do you validate that in other ways that you get that kind of buy-in? But you see that happening around the world, where there are things that we believe as there are facts, but people have turned that into beliefs as opposed to the actual facts.
It's easier to believe a city that reports number of potholes, I think, compared to what you read in a tweet today. So, any other opinions on how we can offer a counterweight to let's call it misinformation?
I think that the culture of data is critical, and therefore you can't expect people to be good at math and to be able to go through raw data in Excel stuff and so on. So you need to bring in, I would say, a lot of dashboarding expertise as well, so that people can better understand what is at stake. The world is complex, and it's getting more complex, and therefore you need to have ways to represent it. And I think this is really extremely important. You need to bring in transparency, education, long-term vision, roadmaps, and this is a lot about data, So it's a new type of culture. I can tell you that I realize that a lot of people are not able to really read a chart, a single chart, and you need to cope with it. So I think that it's something, the user experience you're providing to the ultimate user is very key, and it goes through being able to measure the touch points and the quality of the touch points and the way people understand what you want to bring in, and to be able to redesign your experience until you're sure that people get it. And I think it's one of the big difference in between, I would say, old organization and, for instance, social media. They are very good at making their point, their user experience.
Could that be one of the challenges, actually, with the way we today present data from cities? They are presented to a well-educated audience like we have in this room, to people perhaps like ourselves who are used to dealing with lots of data and lots of uncertainty. But if you are not somebody in this room, might it be too difficult? Might it be too difficult to actually understand what is being poured on you as a citizen? Any thoughts on how we can make this more convenient and more democratic? Because democratic, I suppose, means we can actually understand the data that is being handed to us.
I don't think that is a direct correlation between democracy and understanding of data. I'm not sure.
And any other ideas? No, that's a valid question. Perfect. We might actually have a first real disagreement growing here.
No,
any thoughts?
I think that I will go back a little bit. One of the things that will happen next, because public safety, if you consider a smart city, I guess one of the most important. There is no smart city that's not safe city. You have to be safe to be smart, anyway. And this is a problem today. If you live in London or if you live even in Spain, and there are many cities, or France, we have had so many situations lately. So it's not a question of you want or not. We don't know how much we don't know, for sure, regarding to what the authorities do, the security part of the government do with our information. But Waterloo has 1,500 cameras. 24/7, There is a lot of algorithms of image analytics already working. So I think that citizens are trading off a little bit of privacy for the feeling of more safeness, right?
And that's exactly what we are. That's exactly what we're doing, I believe. We are trading privacy for some common goods. Actually, talking about commons, it sort of ties back a little bit to this democracy question. Gilles, you have an opinion on commons in this?
Yeah, I said that I believe one of the common is to be able to build for the future, and the way we would use open source is probably more sustainable than using some private software. So that's part of I would call common. You know, if you develop open source, it's much more common than if you say to one.
Do you think we can find commons in our sort of social systems as well? Sort of stepping away from technology for a second.
The thing which we are not really good at is bringing common in user experience. If you think about Linux, for instance, it's not very good at user experience, and I don't know why. I've tried to understand that, but user experience is not really common. It doesn't fit well, you know. But we can probably leverage, in general, some experiences and some experiences that, for instance, relates to privacy. If you think about Estonia, for instance, it's a very good example. Your data are exposed into the administration. Any public officer can access to your data. But anytime someone accesses to your private data, you know it as a citizen. And you can complain. If you feel that it's inappropriate, you can complain. And as a result...
We have it as well in Czech
say?
Republic. We have it as well in Czech Republic.
Okay, great, wonderful. I didn't know. So in Czech Republic
record,
and in
every March
Estonia,
I get the record.
they have
was
designed
watching my
a
data.
user experience that is dealing with, trying to deal with the notion of trading your privacy for security. You know, so, and I think it's great. So it's a lot about new routes, new experiences to tackle the issue of not being into 1984 all the day.
Yeah, but for example, I guess in Sweden, I don't know who is from Sweden, you are from Sweden, even the tax records are public. So it is extremely sensitive things. I mean, just imagine that your tax records were public.
Oh, it's even
I mean,
worse
the guys
than
are
that. It's
normally
actually even
doing
worse
it.
than that.
Are you French?
It's even
So your
published
tax
in the
records
newspapers.
are public?
Yeah.
You?
Are your tax records public?
Not all.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can tell you, it's
Neither do I. I mean, in our country, it's
local
impossible.
newspapers publish how much you make, the sort of top lists of that, which is sort of awkward. But that's how it is in Sweden. Feel free to move to us. You get a personal number. We'll keep tab of you for the rest of your life. But it's still a fairly sort of open and nice way of being cared for, I suppose, as opposed to some of the darker sides of data. So let's go away from the dark side. Let's get into the light again. If I were to ask you for one example each of a really good case where you have had experience of actually, and I'm going to ask every single one of you this question, so you get a chance to think about it, where you can take one good case. It's also a question from the audience, by the way, so thank you very much, where you have actually been able to say, but this is a success story in bringing democratic processes closer to the citizens in your cities. Who would like to start?
I can give you a very simple example, which actually didn't work, but I completely by chance discovered that there was voting on whether to make my street pedestrian or not. And I thought about, what about trying to engage all the people I know through social media? And I thought it was not the most appropriate way. And I went into the street and I started to ask the people, why don't you vote for it? You know? But actually it was the last day. So I managed to convince maybe 10 or 15 people, and it was too late, so it didn't pass. But I think what was to me a very good experience is that, you know, I created an experience which was partially digital and partially presential, physical. You know, I think it's typically the type of things I'd like to see more. You know, to use the platforms, the digital platforms, to create some real life engagement as well, and try to avoid that people get more and more isolated because they can do everything they can via digital platforms.
So other examples of the sort of the best examples we have of seeing this in practice?
Well, I'll come back to petitions, where I think democracy is about considering the minority. And 10,000 votes in Kiev, it's not so big, you know. You almost can do that in just making good information spreading in your school or at your job, and you almost get it. And the electronic system and transparent voting, let it happen. Another thing is, I also consider that as a good example. In 2017, Kyiv started that innovative project program and allocated 100 million budget for that innovation. And the process is, there is budget and there is innovative projects trying to work with that budget. And the decision-making process is based only on people voting. So it's the same platform, identified voting.
Direct democracy.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Danielle?
I can give a more recent example that's very tactical. So as we're deploying a smart lighting system across the city, before we sort of settled in on the lights, and we actually did a demonstration in several different neighborhoods and then put out a survey and got input on that process. So what do you think of these lights? And based on that input and feedback, we were able to adjust what we had initially thought we were going to deploy to something else that we think will bring a better resident experience. So it's a very tactical way of leveraging that direct input in a way that's hopefully making our neighborhoods both safe but also pleasant places to be.
Thank you. Claudio?
Yeah, I have been involved in a project in Bristol in UK, where they deployed a digital platform in a community that suffered a lot of problems of humidity and temperature in the house. So this platform would permit to measure humidity, temperature, and the comfort. This was two objectives and one subjective input. And they found out that refurbishing the heating system of this community pays 10 times the cost of NHS, the public health system. So it is a very, very pragmatic approach of a good use of a social platform.
Yeah, very good, very good. Adriana, a perspective, a decision you made where you had really good use of data, or really good use of connectivity with
It's funny enough you're asking me. I mean, it's a recent project I started with my colleagues. I was keen to know how the waste management is organized in Prague. And they came last week and brought me a huge data set, and I said, this is a catastrophe. And just because, imagine, you have a street and you have 4 to 5 different garbage bins, which are collected by 3 or 4 different companies. Just imagine the pollution, the traffic, and the entire nonsense of it. So, and I said, okay, this is a tragedy, and we can't go on with that. So I commissioned them to go with the project and propose me the best way how to do it. And I hope they will be ready by a month. So this data can help us to improve processes in the city, especially garbage management is happening every day. And I think we can reduce not only the pollution, and we can improve traffic in the city, because just imagine in the morning you are standing with your car behind this big truck, and you are just nervous to get to your work. And it's happening 5, 6, 10 times a day. So it can be improved by data.
I think it's a good point. It's actually a segue into the next question coming from the audience, from Lucas, who is wondering about...
we banned Segway.
who is wondering about how to motivate citizens to share data. And quite honestly, I would not want to be part myself in thinking too much about waste management or any other.
Well, that's my job.
That's your job, exactly. So how do we motivate citizens to be part of these democratic processes?
Well,
even
I
though
can
they might
give you
not
an
want to
example.
all the time?
We just cut it, took a part of our budget to make a participatory budget for the 57 boroughs, and they actually, if the citizens agree that something have to be done in their neighborhood, they can take the budget and do it. With the help of the local borough municipality. So this is the direct help. I think it's a way.
So I'm thinking there might be two ways of getting citizens involved. There's let's call it the city administration side, which you represent, and there might be the kind of the technical aspect of just sort of slipping it into some system, and suddenly it appears, and suddenly you are activating me from a sort of a CIO perspective. So Danielle, what's your perspective? What can you do to get me engaged in what you do if I were to move to Chicago?
So we had a very recent pilot that, so we have an organization in Chicago called UI Labs, which brings together university and industry to bring new technologies to market more quickly. And one of the labs is City Digital, who is represented here. And they had a recent pilot project where they brought together a variety of partners to test how can we engage with residents to change their behaviors, to reduce congestion on our public transit. And so, they, on certain days asked people to sign up to get, sort of these text message alerts, and then they tried different methods of motivating those residents to change those behaviors, and were able to, get a pretty solid engagement rate, with people opting in, and then also see some real behavior change based on some of those things. And one of the ways they did that was to incentivize by giving a credit to that resident for their fare if they were to either travel before or after a certain period of time when there was going to be a heavy traffic on that particular public transit line. So I think that's a really great way that we can kind of engage people to have a positive outcome in the mobility of our city, right?
It certainly is. I noticed I was part of a White House grants committee earlier this year, and I noticed that every city in the US is focused on transport when it comes to smart city. That's a red thread in North America, much more so than in other places in the world. A question again to you, Adriana. If you put your thinking cap on and your dream forward a few years, what would you like to see happening in this particular space of connecting citizens to yourself? Through digitization, what is it that you're missing that you don't have today? If you were to, in the perfect world, what is it that you would want? What kind of tools would you want to have at your disposal to be kind of better at doing your job and more in tune with what people want?
First, I'm not want to live in a perfect world, because
perfect. You can move in with me then.
And I admit the mistakes we are making, and I make, and. Well, maybe a better understanding what the city is doing by implementing this way of decision making. That is not clear so far for the entire citizenship, I guess, for the majority, because it's really complex. But first signs of a success will be visible. I think people will more understand why we have to invest in data platforms and all kind of sophisticated tools to make the life of the citizen better. And this is our rule, to make them understand that this is the way how it should be done. And they can, of course, participate. As I said, we are open to any suggestions they are bring to us, and we are open to talk to them, of course. But of course, the life is not endless, and at the end of the day, we have to make the decision. And this is something which is not easy, but of course, that's our job. And I hope that life through technologies can be a little bit more safer in our cities, because this is my aim, because this, as I said, it's my priority to provide safety for our citizens, and the rest will come somehow.
Good point, good point. So I suppose we're all curious about the artist over there and how this session has been all pulled together. You on the side, can you give a thumbs up if it looks like it's captured well on the... Is it good? It's good, very good, very good. I'm very curious to see how it played out on that side. Sort of a final question, and I think I'm going to give it to you, Danielle, and you, Vasyl. What is it that you would like to see from your, let's call it, city administration side when you drive this future forward? What kind of an engagement would you like to see with them in order to drive this in the right way? Is there something missing, or do you have everything? Is everything aligned? Or if you had a wish list, what would it be?
I can give a start. So I think Jill mentioned sort of this user-centered design. I think one of the things the government has been missing is a focus on that experience. How do we do a better job of making it easier to interact with us? And so that's one of the things that, but those are new approaches that we'll have to take with our city departments that, may have in the past acted as a proxy to our direct users. So how do we demonstrate value of using those kinds of design techniques and developing, and as we digitize more of our services, is I think that's one thing that we're looking forward to.
Citizen-centric design. And Vasyl?
I think that the one part that is missing, my opinion, is, well, there are a lot of things happened, like making people initiate something and then the discussion is started and the process is handled. But there is nothing about letting municipalities, city power, initiate something by themselves, like social surveys, opinion polls, something that could feedback based on their initiatives. And I would be happy to see that, and I believe in this.
More responsiveness in what you're doing with the rest of the city. Well, we are over time. We can obviously go on for hours and hours, but we need to be respectful of everybody's time here. It's been a pleasure of taking us through sort of the dark parts of what data can do for us or what it can't do, and I hope you've enjoyed this panel as much as I have. And a big hand to our phenomenal panel.